it is really hard. It is really hard for somebody to figure out when I don't have money, when I don't have access, when I don't have network, how do I figure out how to get all of these things I need? And how do I even know I need them? It's hard. It's a huge challenge, but it is critical to help people break through those barriers and move into a different life.
I think. Welcome, everybody. My name is Taylor Justice.
And I'm Esther Farkas.
And today we have a very special guest. Steve, we want to welcome you to the What Unites Us podcast. Steve Preston is the CEO of Goodwill and is a triple threat: business experience, government experience, nonprofit leadership. And we're super excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction. I have to remember that triple threat concept. Maybe I'll use that with my children.
It goes back to my basketball days, just the triple threat for sure.
Awesome. Yeah.
So we wanted to start off a little bit talking about your values, and we like to talk with leaders about what made them the leaders they are today, and where they came from, and what shaped them. And so I've heard a lot of your and read some of your prior interviews, and you talk a bit about your mom and growing up in Germany during World War II. And my family, I'm Hungarian and I'm Jewish, so that necessarily involves the Holocaust. And so I've got family history as well, and so was very moved hearing you speak about that. So maybe you can just tell our listeners a little bit about your parents and how you grew up, and some of the things that informed the values that you live by today.
Yeah, well, both of my parents grew up in very difficult circumstances. Both of them experienced deep poverty, limited education, and really very significant barriers in life. And both of them were really hardworking and really tenacious. My dad actually grew up in Eastern Kentucky, in Appalachia. He was the ninth of 11 children, and he grew up in a coal mining camp. So the 11 people in a little kind of 4-room shack, where they used to joke they could see outside without opening the window because the wallboards didn't quite fit together. Mm-hmm. So he grew up in that, dropped out of school after 9th grade and went to work in the foundries. My mother grew up in Germany during World War II. She was born in 1930. So really her entire childhood into adulthood was, sort of as fascism was growing, then the war, and then deep post-war poverty. And her stories were chilling. And I can't imagine any child experiencing that. So we kind of knew where they came from, and we also knew how much they wanted for us to have a better life, which they gave us. And their stories and their experiences really animated life for us in a powerful way. They were incredibly committed to their 5 children. We just never doubted their love. We never doubted their support. They were really decent people. And they both had a really powerful sense of fairness in life and injustice. Mm-hmm. And it gave us a really strong sense of what it meant to have integrity. So when I was growing up, I really didn't know what was out there for me. It was sort of a fairly kind of limited world. Although I did know that somehow I wanted to make an impact in life. And I sort of felt like if I worked hard in school and I excelled, it would lead me to somewhere. But another really important, or probably the most important turning point for me was when I was 12, I really kind of came to a strong sense of faith through some relatives, which completely changed my life. I increasingly realized that life was about something bigger than me, as much as you can at that young age. And I really developed this kind of strong sense of self. And so over the years, my understanding of that faith has become a lot richer and deeper. But today it's completely formed who I am and how I think about people and my purpose and how I think about my relationship to other people and my commitment to them. And so those were a lot of very big formative elements that led to who I am today.
Yeah, and so to fast forward a bit, so you then went to business school. You went into the business world, mm-hmm. but and kind of looking at your background, I wanted to dig in a little bit around your time in government.
Yeah.
and specifically the economic downturn in 2008, where you were at HUD. Can you
Yeah.
kind of walk us through that experience and being
Yeah.
a leader in that type of environment?
Well, it was, I was really fortunate. I had, especially considering where I came from, I had great educational opportunities. As you mentioned, I went into business. I worked on finance and then corporate leadership for about 25 years. And when I moved into the government, all of those skills and backgrounds and experiences kind of came together for me in a really powerful way. The first job I had was running the SBA, and I came to that in the middle of not long after the Katrina crisis, and we were part of the big aid agencies, and so I had this experience in a national crisis, which was very visible, really required a lot of fixing and change, and for me to be a public presence for the first time. And so the combination of that government experience and then that experience in a national crisis all came together when the financial crisis hit. And so I was asked, because of that, to move over into that role. Now, for me, I'm not a traditional HUD secretary. Your traditional HUD secretary has deep background in poverty housing and public housing and homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
The financial crisis was driven by home ownership and mortgages.
Yeah.
And the need to address it required a lot of operational skills because, HUD, FHA was part of HUD, and we were kind of, I think FHA went from like 3% of the market to 25% of the market when subprime went away. We were implementing major housing legislation, which we'd never been before. I was on the board of the TARP, which was the body that was making decisions on where to invest the money. So it was just this wonderful opportunity. And people always, I question when I talk about a crisis in that way, but as a human being, just this wonderful opportunity to take all of this life experience and all of these unique learnings I had and apply them in a way that just mattered so much. And I don't know who gets to do that, right? And so it was funny when the president was interviewing me for the job. He said, "Why would you want this job?" And I said, it sort of felt like we were working on all cylinders all the time.
Did the crisis was it already ongoing when you were tapped for that role?
The crisis,
or did you have that role prior to?
Was ramping and gathering steam. And I saw the crisis emerging when I was at the SBA, because I was looking at credit available for small businesses and what was going into those markets. And I began to see it contract. And I actually, in a couple of settings, expressed my concern, because at the same time, the subprime crisis was beginning to town. And we didn't really understand that it was going to have this systemic impact. And there were a lot of people believed that the subprime market was relatively, defined, and that it was sort of unto itself. And what we realized is that those subprime loans and then derivatives on top of those and all the other bad things that happened had proliferated financial markets across the world and were much, much greater than anybody had ever imagined. And so that emerging visibility is what we saw.
So just to summarize a little bit. So, in 2008, 2009, when you went from the Small Business Administration to HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Administration, what was going on was a lot of the big banks in this country were realizing that mortgage loans that they had given to homeowners that they then packaged up and collateralized and sold were worth a lot less than they thought, and they were keeping track of on their books. In many cases, were worth zero. And so that caused a lot of these banks this is a massive oversimplification, but just so folks understand, it caused these banks to have just a lot less cash and money and assets on their balance sheet than they thought overnight almost. And so, no one could see how quickly it was going to come, right? That's what was, I think, really incredible.
But did you see that so what we see from different leaders that we engage with, there's commonalities, right? They come from humble beginnings. They have that grit that you mentioned. And they also seek out opportunities that I think maybe others might run away from, but they see an opportunity like in the chaos to lead. Was that like a conscious decision of yours of like, I'm going to go run towards this because I know that I can create value and help, and I want to be at that table with all of these other historical leaders through that time to make the decisions? Because to your point, being at that table was probably pretty amazing, but was it a conscious choice? It was like, okay, I'm going to go do this and run towards it.
It was, yeah. And the conscious decision to run toward was when I took the SBA job. And the way that looked was I was a corporate leader. I had a great job. I had a great community. I had a great gig going. I loved my work. And I felt like I wanted to make a different kind of contribution in life. And when I was presented with the SBA opportunity, it was 10 months after Katrina. You all may recall it was a very difficult situation. The federal government was under attack from every angle. I had never been a public figure. I had never been exposed to any of that. And I'd never failed. And when I reached out to my group of people that I talked to, people said, don't do it. It's going to be too hard to succeed. You are at a perfect point in your career. You're about to become a CEO of a large company. And like, don't do this unless you really know what you're getting into. And I went through this process where I said, who am I? What do I stand for? What impact do I want in life? And I remember consciously saying, 30 years from now, when I come to the end of my life, or 40 years, and I look back, do I want to say, even if I fail, do I want to be the person who said, no, I'm stepping up to the plate? Because back then, like, I was watching the news stories about people in New Orleans. I was, like a lot of us, we'd sit there in tears just wondering, like, how could this happen to our people? And I can't be the guy, like, I'm not going to be the guy who doesn't do something about it if that platform comes up. And so for me, it was there was this moment about, like, I say I want to make a difference. I say, like, what am I, like, what's it worth? And what am I really, and I had 5 little kids. And so I said, I talked to my wife. My wife is, no, we will do this together.
I think those underpinning of those values that you had, coupled with you taking the step forward to go make it happen. I think we can all, thank you for making that choice, because, at times I don't know if everybody would, but
it was one of the best decisions.
So I appreciate that background. So let's fast forward. Goodwill.
Yeah.
CEO, big mission. I think you guys have a big vision for where you're taking the organization as well. I know you're there with 700 plus Goodwillers in Charlotte right now.
It's very exciting.
Talk to us a little bit about that transition coming into that role and your vision for the organization. And I know Esther and I were talking a little bit before the show here about the website that you just launched, and I think it's a super innovative approach that you guys are taking to kind of mirror some of the commerce things that are happening in, I guess, traditional business world. So
how I got here. So I went from the government. I went back in the private sector. I ran a couple of companies, and I went through this sort of once again, a sense of wanting to have a different kind of impact in life. And just sort of a little bit of background. When I was a single guy living in New York City, which is where you guys are, I spent all my weekends with kids in tough neighborhoods. That's just what I did. I love kids. I wanted to be a part of it. I wanted to connect with them. And specifically tutoring, mentoring, and programs that help provide them with better educational opportunities and support along the way. And that was really a big part of what fed me during that period of life. Fast forward a number of years into the government, both of the agencies I ran supported people in deep need, and especially HUD, because many of the people we served were in poverty. And I felt like I had this ability to see what happened with those children when they didn't get on the right path, when they didn't move out of their circumstances. And I began to see what it meant to live for perpetual poverty and multi-generational poverty, and why it was difficult for people to move on. So when I went back into the private sector, increasingly spent my volunteer time and philanthropic time working with organizations that supported adults who are trying to move forward in life out of very difficult circumstances. And as you can appreciate, one bad decision or one bad circumstance can lead to another. It compounds and it becomes extremely difficult. So I left my last company and I wrote for myself a personal mission statement. And it was something like, I don't have it in front of me, but it was something like to run a company whose stated purpose is to hire and support difficult to employ people or something like that, to help them flourish, move forward in life, supporting themselves, their families, and their communities. And I didn't really know how I was going to do that. I remember this good friend of mine in private equity saying, you're trying to thread a very narrow needle here, right? It's going to be really hard. And I started looking at some other things, and then I get this call from Goodwill. And I said to the recruiter, I don't want to do that. I don't know much about retail, and it's why would I want to do that? Yeah. And so I hung up the phone, and then this recruiter's boss called me back and said, I think this is what you want to do. And I'm like, well, tell me more. And it was like, it was the mission statement I had written for myself like 15 months before. And it was just, I couldn't believe it. And so the mission itself resonates for me on such a deep level, partially because of my own background and where, much of my extended family is, but very much because of what I saw with real people in real lives, in real families that I knew at a younger age, and seeing how the needs can be perpetuated, and also believing so deeply in the inherent potential of every human being, the opportunity in life, if we can tap into that potential and develop that potential. I should say, if they can tap into their potential and develop their potential, we just kind of walk alongside them and help. And what that means for everybody, it has a massive impact. And, a lot of times it's easy to say, well, it's great. We want people to get a good job and take care of themselves. But you know what? Work is bigger. It not only gives people self-sufficiency, but it brings to them dignity and a sense that they're providing for people. It provides us with a community. I mean, when both of us leave this podcast, we're going to be connecting with our people and engaging. It's where we contribute our gifts. And I think it is an essential part of human flourishing. And that's what we all want, right? We all want to flourish. I mean, I do. And and most of the decisions I've made in life have been part of my desire to flourish.
Well, I wanted to dig into that because I think obviously Goodwill is a recognizable brand.
Yeah.
And people know it because it's in the community. They know the retail locations. And one thing that was very interesting to me as I learned more about the organization is all the other things that Goodwill does that I don't know if the general public is that aware of, but should be. And so you're talking about workforce, and it's such a key pillar of your mission and the work that you do. Can you just dig in a little bit deeper for those that are listening of like the hardcore work and skills that you're providing to these individuals? It's fascinating.
Yeah. So in our mission and in our vision statement for 120 years, you will never see the words retail, clothing, reuse, any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. Our mission and our purpose is to help people overcome barriers in life and help them reach their full potential through learning and what we call the power of work. And that's always been what it was. And what our founder did is he parachuted in the middle of deeply impoverished neighborhood in Boston over 125 years ago, saw those needs, started meeting them, and realized and started collecting clothing for poor people to give away. And then he said, wait, if we clean and repair this clothing and sell it, we've got a business and I can give them a job instead of a handout. And that's what launched this entire enterprise. And so who we are at our core is people who believe in helping people change the trajectory of their life. We don't want to just help them, get the next job. We want to fundamentally help them change the trajectory of their lives so that they can continue to grow and flourish and do all those great things. So we have 3,300 stores. We have 120,000 employees. Those stores are an important way in which we advance that mission. A lot of the people that come to work in our stores are people that have experienced significant challenges in life. So we are the way, sort of that first step to help them move forward, and hopefully we'll give them a long pathway there. But most of the people we serve come through job centers that aren't part of the stores, right? They come into job centers. Some of them get light touch services where we help them find a job. But where the magic really happens is when we have enough time when somebody will commit the time to work with us, where we assign them a career navigator, we assess their goals, where they are, the challenges in their life, and then we work with them on their journey, which can be everything from teaching them digital skills and job readiness skills to helping them get stable housing and healthcare, and then moving through that to prepare for and candidate for a meaningful job. And that's where we live. And that's the energy of Goodwill.
If you're a for-profit, that would be incredible staying power. If you're a nonprofit, it's almost unimaginable because, you have obviously annual funding obligations, and sustainability is always such a key question for nonprofit. And so what is it about Goodwill that gave it such staying power?
Well, I think our mission is enduring, right? And it continues to be deeply needed in our society. I think we're perpetuating. For years, we've perpetuated an underclass in our country, but we see this perpetuation of something very bad, where we have young people born into situations which are incredibly difficult to overcome. And when they move forward in life, it becomes even more difficult to overcome if we haven't helped them address their needs early on. It's not hard to talk to a couple of people who've been helped by us and just be overwhelmed and just say, oh my God, like this is just unbelievable. People who've gone from, homelessness with children to a digital job in 6 months. I mean, sometimes the pathway is the two poles are that close. It's not always, or people who've come out of incarceration with all sorts of historical issues and family challenges, et cetera, who work through our programs and find a completely different life ahead of them. So I think the mission is essential. It's inspiring. Every one of us kind of understand it. And that is, I think, and the other thing I would say is we still lean on the words of our founder. We still, because there was so much truth in them, some of what I just said, but he went forward with such resilience and commitment and resolve to just bust through all of the challenges with the work we do, and demonstrated that tenacity to get to the other side. So, but you can't do it without great people, right? And we have to make sure that mission continues to live in our people, and that it drives innovation and creativity and commitment, and the same resolve and commitment and resilience I just mentioned. Those two things need to both be together for us to have to be an enduring organization. And I believe we have those. And I believe it's not diminishing. I believe it's actually growing and taking a bigger life right now.
Yeah, and I think the words of the mission, you mentioned them earlier, of being unsatisfied until every human reaches their potential. I mean, that's super powerful. And I think that's, part of those values in the mission is how our organizations also found each other. Because in addition to all of your retail locations, in addition to all the work you do around workforce, you hit on it a little bit, but it truly is that cliche of it takes a village, because it's not just workforce, it's the housing, it's healthcare, it's all of those other factors that allow people to overcome the challenges that they're facing, because as you mentioned, either one mistake or one issue can then compound quickly. So there's multiple things that need to be taken care of, and Goodwill being the epicenter of a lot of communities and being that connective tissue, we came together to be the digital connection point to all of those partnerships that you're creating, to help measure the success of that growth. Talk a little bit about the relationship between the work, but also the importance of technology to support those individuals in need.
Yeah. So technology, we're in the middle of a massive strategic transformation right now. We're about 2 years into it, and we cannot do it without technology. Historically, we were not a kind of a technology-enabled network. Now, technology is at the center of everything we do, and technology does a lot of things. And you guys are living this right now. Technology is access. First of all,
Yep.
you can't reach people, you can't reach partners, uh, you can't get resources to the right places unless they're delivered technologically, because printing out PDFs and handing them out doesn't really get you real far anymore. The second thing is technology gives you tools to use whatever materials or whatever supports you have more effectively, and technology gives you data to understand your impact, to understand pathways, to understand how you're interacting with partners. And the third thing that technology does for us is if we can build technology centrally, it allows those 155 local organizations to have technology that they couldn't buy or develop or use effectively on their own, because they're not large enough organizations in many cases. And so if we can deliver that to them, we open up all of that world of technology to smaller local organizations so that they can leverage it when they're serving individuals. And if we really want to respect people in this process and really want them to succeed, we have to provide them with the right kind of support that enables that success. And so that's where your work, how you're connecting with third parties, how you're enabling people like us to refer back and forth, simplifies that coordinated solution for the people.
Yeah, and it resonated so much when we were engaging with you and the team, because we had the very similar experience. When we founded Unite Us in the early days, what we realized is navigating all of those different needs in the community is frustrating. And especially if you're dealing with a life circumstance that exacerbates that need. And the focus, to your point, was I would never in a million years give one of my buddies, my mother, my sister, a piece of paper and say, hey, go figure it out. I would hold her hand or their
Yeah.
hand and walk them through that process. And so when we met with your team, you were doing that at scale. And then we, to your point, being able to build that connective tissue to make sure that your team is doing that at the top of their license, where they don't have to do that manual process, but then also continuing to innovate, where if we want to improve economic mobility across this country, we need to be able to both have that access for those individuals to all of those other services, but then measure it collectively, where everyone now has like a foundational metric that we're going to be able to say, hey, here's how we partner, and here's how we partner better. And like those community organizations, again, have those technology tools to help those folks in need. It was just like a match made in heaven, because you guys live your values. You're very passionate about it. Obviously, you're a great communicator, and your team is also great at communicating. We're just extremely excited about this partnership and continuing to advance that economic mobility for millions of people.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And you sure saw it with the military. That was a great place for you all to start. I actually got a lot of visibility into that in the government, because I launched two entrepreneurship programs for people coming out of people coming back home. That was a period of time when a lot of people were coming back home, and then oversaw the Veterans Homelessness Program at HUD when we were trying to expand it. But one of the things I did also serve on a commission that was looking at all the challenges that people had when they came home. And what you realize is accessing all of the different kinds of support, especially when they're disconnected and they have several approval processes and you're going to different places. It is really hard. It is really hard for somebody to figure out, when I don't have money, when I don't have access, when I don't have network, how do I figure out how to get all of these things I need? And how do I even know I need them? It's hard. It's a huge challenge, but it is critical to help people break through those barriers and move into a
Yeah,
different
and
life.
I think the work that you're doing too, you mentioned it in the very beginning, but helping people not making bad decisions or life decisions based on their current predicament. And so what we see quite often of, if I'm dealing with a single mother that's on Medicaid, that's on SNAP, that's on WIC, government one has a hard time seeing across all three of those programs at a state level. But if she walks into one of your facilities and goes through a workforce program, and she finds an employment opportunity that actually pays her too much, where she's no longer qualified for SNAP, she's then making that life choice of, do I go to work or do I stay on SNAP so I can feed my family? And I think the critical access points where you're helping fill that gap, because it doesn't need to be in perpetuity. It's fill that gap for a short period of time to make sure that folks don't have to make those short-term life decisions, and being that guide, if you will, to help them navigate that process. Because if they're on their own, again, they just go into survival mode. That touch point, we always say,
Yeah.
You can't reinvent human and social services by eliminating the humans. And your team is that group on the ground that is that wraparound service, like physical wraparound service, to make sure that folks, are making, long-term solid decisions.
Yeah, I think also, and sometimes it can feel a little crass talking about these needs and human condition issues, and in a way that connects it with finance.
Yeah.
But let me just go into that realm for a second, because I think often people look at this stuff and say, this is a money pit. I mean, how much money do we have to spend on this stuff? I grew up in the financial services industry. I was a banker, right? The ROI on this is massive. Let's talk about a person who's coming out of incarceration. It's massive. Somebody who's in incarceration, we're spending $40,000 a year, probably keeping them incarcerated. We're spending all sorts of money to support their families who don't have the resources. So when you look at the perpetuation of all of that, relative to spending $10,000 or $15,000 for a year to help that person get to the next level, and then maybe some additional support going forward, it is an economically enormously logical thing to do. The ROI is massive, but it can feel like gosh, this costs so much money. The issue is the great thing is we're investing in humans to help humans flourish and help our society. But the pure financial thing here is very compelling as well. The other thing I want to mention to this, and I feel this very strongly, the human being lives in our hearts, but what we don't often talk about is the perpetuation of this gap in our society, what it does to communities that aren't flourishing, and in many cases just terribly damaged, what it does for social divisions in our country, what it does for the inability to move an equitable society forward. And even if you go forward from that, what it means in terms of public policy and the need to focus our policy more on an enabling future rather than just pouring money into problems, right? These issues go well beyond the individual into every tier of our society, and unless we are willing to take them on aggressively as a country, we will continue to perpetuate this horrific situation we see today. And we have to be committed to change.
Yeah, and I'm so happy you mentioned that financial component, because at times when we're dealing with human and social services, and especially in the nonprofit community, sometimes that can be a bad word when you talk about the finances or the revenue pieces. And Esther mentioned this too on the sustainability aspect. But at the end of the day, if you're able to affect that systematic change that you're looking for, you have to align the economics to it. And unfortunately, that's how certain sectors across our nation see value. And so the beauty of what you and your team have done is you've aligned the value of taking care of humans with the financial value that has, not only on their own economic impact, but the impact that has on their communities, the state, the region, and ultimately the nation. So I think that's such a critical piece that you mentioned there.
Or the responsibility for us is to ensure that every dollar we have is quality, it's relevant, it's spent in a quality, relevant way, and it drives outcomes and impacts that we can track and that we can represent, and hopefully that others can learn from.
Yeah. And so, in wrapping up here, but we ask every leader that we speak to this question of Goodwill, again, being around for 120 to 125 years, the longevity of the organization. Is it the brand or is it the people that creates that enduring organization?
Well, I think for brand longevity, obviously it's both. But let me just frame that up a bit. We exist because our mission is essential, and it is life changing, and it has very broad implications, as I just said, for individuals, their families, our communities, and the fabric of our society. And so it is essential. And that mission, because it is essential, is a rallying cry for change in ways that benefit us all. And so, I think it has to start with that mission, because that is what compels us, and that is what animates our own sense of our work. However, you need to make sure that the people, that we need to make sure that our people are fueled by that mission to ensure the longevity of our work. And that's not always just a kind of a given. It's important for us to keep it alive on our teams. And if we do that, we can recruit talented and creative people who are tenacious and persevering. Because without that, the advancement of the mission begins to die. And I think for us, there are two things that we really need to be anchored in. Number one, we have a remarkable founder. I've mentioned it before, and his history and the legacy that he has left us with is unbelievably inspiring, not just in its purpose, but in the way that he pursued it doggedly throughout his life. We need to make sure to lean into that history at the same time that we're looking to the future. And you'd asked about technology, and we have to make sure that we are relevant in our current context, that we are highly skilled and capable in delivering the support we have, and that we are very much forward-looking, sort of anchored in the values and the impact of our past, but very forward-looking to ensure that we're maximizing the impact and using every tool that we have and every bit of talent we can bring in to achieve that.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing, Taylor, is we need to rethink our question. I think it should be, Is it the brand, is it the people, or is it the mission? And I think you picked door number 3, and I think it's really the core to how a company grows and how you achieve your objectives, is making sure everyone's aligned around a very clear mission. And for you, that's been the same for the past
or
century
maybe
or
Steve
so.
just ended our podcast because he solved it. We have the answer. We can shut this thing down. We're done. But Steve Preston, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for living your values, driving that mission forward, owning the responsibility of your work. It's truly incredible to see, and we're happy to be on this journey with you. So thank you for joining What Unites Us.
Thank you so much.